In December 1989, the event occurred in Hong Kong's North District, which was an international municipality in the New Territories. There was an old restaurant called Kong Cha that specialized in various types of appealing cuisine, but generally only offered char siu, rice and pho. Another day, Sheng, a young guy working at the restaurant, received a call to order food for 4 people, including pho and grilled pork rice with eggs. "It's at number C, building B in the Garden Plaza, isn't it? Okay, I'll deliver it to you right now." Sheng instantly grabbed a pen and notepad to jot down the address. He then proceeded to deliver food to clients. This address wasn't difficult to find, so Sheng didn't have to spend too much time to look for it. It was an ancient building, it was chilly, and appeared like it hadn't been occupied in a long time. When he arrived at the correct address, he raised his hand and rang the doorbell. A blast of wind blew, sending shivers down his spine. But the doorbell rang for a long time. No one opened the door, and the posters strewn in front of the door indicated that this home had appeared to be abandoned for a long time. Sheng rang the doorbell many times more, but no one replied or opened the door. Sheng wondered if he had misspelled the address, since the restaurant had been quite busy before. Thinking he'd been scammed, he turned his back to return to the restaurant, but as he did, a voice in the room sounded from behind Sheng. It sounded like someone was attempting to open the door. He thought he heard a voice, but it was foggy and indistinct. The door suddenly opened with a creak, accompanied by a terrible sound made Sheng nervous. The door was opened to expose a small gap, but the interior was so dark that Sheng couldn't see what was inside. The person inside only spoke in a low, raspy voice and very slightly opened the door, as though no one was permitted to peek inside. Then that person handed a banknote through the gap of the door. This person's hand was really odd. Even though the person opened the door slightly and placed the money outside, Sheng couldn't see who it was. It appeared to be a male. Sheng carefully examined the note. There was no issue. Sheng thought the man was strange when he instructed him to leave the meal at the door. That night, the restaurant was being cleaned up and getting ready to close. While auditing the income and expenses for the day, the owner noticed something odd. He discovered a just paper among real money. He had no idea where this note originated from, but it made him feel extremely uneasy. Who is taking part in this game? Why is there a just paper here? Mr. Lee displayed the note to the employees and cautioned them. He suspected that real money had been switched for just paper. He tried to mention it aloud so that the staff wouldn't do it again, but he became enraged and tossed the just paper in the garbage. The next day, an order for dinner came from that address again, and they ordered the restaurant to serve them the same meal as yesterday. The owner promptly confirmed the order and asked Sheng to continue delivering. However, the situation with food delivery remained same from yesterday. Money was still given through the door gap, and food was still requested to be put at the door. The people inside were still not revealing themselves.
Who did it? Do you think I'm a moron?
The owner's voice continued to howl loudly. The reason was that he spotted a just paper again at night. Seeing the boss was so upset, Sheng then informed him about the unusual food delivery to that address. For a long time, the owner reasoned that if the residents in that house continued to order meals from the restaurant, he would find out the truth. The next day, as predicted, there was an order from that address again. The owner personally delivered the meal to the location and received the cash from the door gap. He picked up the bill and carefully examined it, flipping it back and forth, but he couldn't see anything suspicious about it. The owner, like Sheng, placed food at the door. He hastily grabbed the money and departed, his face now full of contemplation mixed with bewilderment. Returning to the store, he placed the money aside this time to observe if anything odd happened, in order to prevent the same misunderstanding as the previous 2 times. After the owner had completed calculating other income, he glanced at the bills in the evening, but what he saw shocked him. This occurrence terrified him so much that he dropped his cigarette and his mouth wide open as if he had witnessed something awful. Those seemingly regular money notes he had placed in a different corner of the table had now been transformed into joss papers once more. The owner was so terrified that he yelled to the police in a quivering voice, "Police! It's me! Something awful has occurred. Please be here as soon as possible." Following to what the owner said, the police hurried to the location, but they discovered that the doorbell was entirely broken and no one came to open the door. The cops had to use force to smash the door down. However, once inside, they discovered that the door was locked from the inside, but the horrifying image in front of their eyes caused them all to fear. There was a mahjong table in the middle of the room and some dead people next to it. They died in a big puddle of dried blood. These people had been dead for a long time, and their corpses had shrunk, leaving just dry skeletons, and their flesh had disintegrated. Based on the conditions at the site, they were most likely using a coal burner in the room to keep warm, but ended up inhaling poisonous gas. Because these people lived very private lives and didn't interact with anyone, no one discovered their bodies. But the empty lunch boxes littered throughout the room gave the cops pause, because everyone in the room was dead. So, who ate the food? These corpses were discovered and transported to the mortuary for forensic testing, confirming that they had been dead for more than a week, although the food in their stomachs had only been there for 2 days, which was rice and fur. The test findings astounded the whole Hong Kong police force. The dead man's fingerprints were also discovered on Mr. Lee's joss papers. Soon after, this odd event traveled across Hong Kong and was published by various media outlets. The occurrence became a riddle that the police could not solve. It had become the Hong Kong's police's sole publicly acknowledged super mysterious case in decades. According to the Feng Shui shaman, the spirits of the dead could not leave the building where the incident occurred since there was no sunshine, so they constantly felt they were still alive, and sometimes people still could hear them. That room was filled with the sound of mahjong players.
One morning, the industrial zone's technical department suddenly became bustling with activities. It was already 9 AM, but Yun was nowhere to be seen, which aroused the 2 workers' curiosity. One of them said that Yun had left work early for his girlfriend's birthday yesterday, so there might be a chance that the guy had overslept. As soon as the man finished his sentence, he saw another man rushing and looking worried as he broke bad news to them. His forehead was dripping with sweat. He told everyone that Yun had been rushed to the hospital as he was involved in an accident. Needless to say, everyone instantly rushed to the hospital to check on their friend. As they arrived at the place, they were relieved to find out that Yun was not in a critical condition. They quickly asked the doctors about his situation, as everyone felt worried when they heard Jan had fallen from a high story. Jan laid on the bed with his face covered with bruises and cuts, looking sorrowful as he couldn't move his body. Two of his friends asked him what had happened. Jan dilated his eyes. He looked scared as he told them about his encounter with a ghost. Yesterday, the man was invited to a birthday party. As he met the woman whom he once loved and found out that she had been married, Jan had drunk a bit too much. Feeling wasted, the man said goodbye to his friends and then walked back home. Jan staggered all the way home. He didn't even know if he was taking the right direction. As the man walked for a while, he stopped by a construction site and found out that the road ahead was under repair due to its bad condition. But Jan kept walking as he was too drunk. He bumped into a sign and fell next to a hole. Jan immediately panicked. He was very close to falling down the hole. He crawled near to it and looked down. Its depth scared him instantly. There were rocks and steel at the bottom of the hole. Despite being scared, Jan felt blessed as he had just escaped death. He angrily got up and released all his pent-up emotions to the sign as he kicked it down the hole. As it reached the bottom, the man laughed cynically as he was delighted to remove the thing out of his sight. All of a sudden, Jan wanted to vomit. The guy seemingly had drunken too much. He went to a corner and threw up. As the man finished his business, he felt so comfortable. However, right that moment, Jan heard a motorcycle sound from behind him. A couple was seen driving to the construction site at a high speed. Jan turned around in panic as he realized the two was heading to the large hole. But as soon as the man could react to it, a loud noise was heard. Sensing something awful had happened, Jan approached the spot, and the scene before his eyes immediately terrified him. A dreadful look appeared on his face. Sweat rolled down his cheeks as he grinded his teeth, knowing he had made a fatal mistake. The couple had fallen down the hole. Their bodies laid unmoving in a pool of blood. Their bike had been badly damaged. The two had died at the scene, and what was seen at the spot was extremely terrifying. Jan quickly ran away after witnessing the incident. Even though it wasn't his sole purpose, his actions had directly caused the two to die tragically. As he finally made his way back to the apartment building, he gently opened the door, carefully not to wake anyone, while praying that nothing bad would happen to him. He got on his bed feeling fearful, trembling, pleading for mercy. He even reassured himself that nothing bad would happen as it wasn't entirely his fault. The next morning, while his friends had left for work early, Jan was still half awake. He tried to sleep a bit longer and hoped what happened last night was just a bad dream of his. However, a few moments later he heard something growling behind him, and the room was taken over by an eerie atmosphere that made his skin crawl. As the man looked up, he instantly got startled by the horrifying scene of the couple dying in the hole last night. They were covered with blood as they screamed loudly and threatened to kill him. Jan shouted loudly. He covered himself with his blanket. It was indeed them. They were standing next to his bed, looking creepy. In a blink of an eye, the man opened his mouth widely as he wanted to eat Jan alive. Jan instantly jumped off his bed. He dodged the sharp nails of the dead couple and ran away in fear. But it was impossible for him to do it as the two were standing next to the main door. So he made his way to the balcony as it was the only way for him to escape. Jan looked down. His heart beat erratically as he was currently at the 7th story of the building. It would be nothing but suicide to jump down from this height. He would definitely end up dying the same way like the dead couple. But it wasn't the only thing that scared him. Now as the ghost approached him looking ferociously. Their eyes were filled with anger. The male ghost extended his arm to Jan, revealing the sharp fingernails while grinding its teeth as it rushed to him. Jan recoiled in horror. As he found himself to be in a tight corner, he pleaded for mercy as there was no way else for him to run. But the male ghost didn't hesitate for a bit. It pushed Jan to fall off the balcony as an act of revenge for what he had done the night before. The push caused Jan to lose his balance and he fell over the balcony. Jan was in extreme fear. He raised his arm in despair. From the balcony, the ghost was staring at him and laughing demonically. However, it was fortunate of Jan to land on a large branch, which greatly reduced the damage of the fall. Thanks to the tree branch, the man still survived after the fall. Jan laid unmoving on the ground, his whole body paralyzed as he unconsciously gazed up. There was no one at the balcony. After laying on the floor for about an hour, he was found by a security guard and quickly rushed to a hospital. As Jan regretfully told the story to his friends, he told them not to be worried much about him. The two friends were astonished to find out about the tragic incident. They quickly went to the construction site and noticed that the hole was being sealed by a road worker. The worker confirmed there was a couple who unfortunately fell down the hole last night, but they survived and had been put under special treatment. The two men were surprised. They then went to the hospital to verify what the road worker had told them. As they arrived at the place, a nurse told them there was indeed a couple being taken to the hospital last night. The woman was slightly injured, but the man was in critical condition. However, he had overcome it and was slowly getting better. The two men then went to the couple's cots. They were still alive, which confused them, as Jan had previously confirmed that the couple didn't make it. The vengeful story which they had been told by Jan no longer made sense now. They started doubting if it was just a nightmare of his. There must be a strong likelihood that Jan had hallucinated and felt disgusted by his sins, an effect that was caused by the excess of alcohol he took in that night. As he was haunted by the scene at the construction site, he had jumped off the balcony and fell on the ground.
It was a strange story that ran into a few years ago. That time I had to take an urgent leave of absence to visit my mother. My parents lived in the countryside, only I went to the city to work. It took me more than a few hours to drive home from work. My parents were old, so I was worried about their health. After my mother's health improved, I decided to drive back to the city for the night. My parents were worried and wanted me to wait until early the morning to go. But I couldn't wait. I just went back to my hometown to check on my mother's health. I couldn't stay long because I had work to do. I explained that I had taken a quick leave and put aside all unfinished work. I need to go to a meeting early tomorrow morning, so I would be late if I stayed. My parents also understood that my work had many difficulties because working in a big city was not easy, especially for those with not excellent qualifications like me. So they just told me to be careful on the road and said goodbye to me. I drove for a bit more and then came out of the village road. The houses on the street were also sparse. Only trees and dirt roads remained. There were no streetlights. If I didn't drive carefully, I would get into a traffic accident. I didn't remember exactly, but I must have driven more than 10 kilometers and finally got off the dirt road. Ahead was the highway. Follow this highway, keep going straight, and I would reach the city. No need to turn anywhere else. While running, I was a little sleepy when suddenly I panicked because I saw a woman lying in front of me on the side of the road. She seemed to be seriously injured. When the headlights of the car came on, I could see even more clearly. Her clothes were torn. There were bright red bloodstains around her body. It looked like she was a victim of a collision or some pillage. I was wondering if I should stop or not. I pushed the wheel to pull over, but then changed my mind because this part often happened in many looting scenes. I need to be very vigilant. The road from my house to the highway was very rough. Because it was a village road, there were almost no houses around with lights on. While driving, I thought about the girl just now, wondering if she had an accident or not. But I still had work and took care of my elderly parents. I couldn't risk my life. I also apologized to the girl. If she was injured, I wouldn't have been able to help her. But then I thought I should put that aside to focus on driving. Suddenly, I saw something equally strange. So many confusing things happened to me tonight. On the side of the road, a woman was standing and waving to a car to hitchhike. It was strange. Why were there so many women walking alone on this deserted street? I thought about it and ran up to check it out. When the woman saw me, she took another step forward and waved her hand faster to get my attention. I also looked at her as very pretty and gentle, not like the robber type. However, I was still confused. I couldn't let my guard down. I did not stop the car completely, but slowly walked close to the side of the road and looked around carefully. The two sides of the road were completely empty. There were no trees to cover, so it was easy to see that there were no other people besides her, so there certainly wouldn't be bandits hiding to rob me. Seeing that, I felt reassured that I stopped the car completely, then called the girl to get in the car. She very happily ran over and thanked me non-stop, making me a little shy. Then she got into the car. I politely greeted her. I also did not forget to ask why she was standing in the middle of the road at late last night, because there were very few houses. She looked at me with a gentle expression and said that she had hitchhiked an acquaintance who came here to catch the bus back to the city to go to school, but was late for the last bus. She had been standing here since afternoon, but no one was willing to help, so she was lucky to meet me. After talking for a while, we were also silent. I also focused on driving. We needed to return to the city early in the morning, so we had to take advantage. At this point, I thought I had run for about an hour, but strangely the surroundings were still familiar to the eyes. I looked out the window to confirm my thoughts. It was still the highway, and the side of the road was a dry field without any trees, exactly like the road where I saw the girl had an accident just now. I clearly remembered that from the place where I met this woman, it only took about an hour to get off the highway and into the residential area. But today was strange. While I was thinking and looking out the window, I had to startle in horror when I turned to the side. Right in front of my eyes was the girl who had the accident earlier. She was still lying on the ground, so it turned out that I was running in a big circle and went back to her place. Too scared, I stepped on the gas and accelerated. I thought I had met a ghost, and that girl was a ghost. At this time, the woman sitting next to me asked me why I didn't help the person in the accident but ran away like that. I didn't say anything, just ran as fast as I could. The woman in my car saw too, so that girl was not a ghost. But no matter how much I tried to run, the scenery around me didn't change. Even though it was very dark, I could still clearly know that I was running in a big circle. At this point, I was so scared. Although I had driven for more than half an hour, the girl who had an accident still appeared in front of my eyes once again. I felt like I was lost in a big maze. Suddenly, a voice came from beside me, but it sounded like it was coming from underground. The voice belonged to the girl sitting next to me. She was blaming me for leaving the victim like that. That voice made me jump. I glanced over and saw the woman's pale face, sharp eyes, and angry expression. That thing scared me. I couldn't look at her anymore. I knew that she was not human anymore, but I still tried to explain that I still had a job and a family. There were countless robberies on the stretch of road, so I had to choose to ignore it. After that, a sudden silence also worried me. I sneaked a glance in the woman's direction to see if it was human or ghost after all. However, before I had time to see her figure clearly, the girl grabbed the steering wheel and held into my ear to force me to turn around. The sudden attack made me lose control of the wheel. The car lost control and I hit the wheel, then ran straight into the side of the road. I also didn't know where the car hit. My head also hit the steering wheel painfully, so when the car stopped, I could only rub my head without having time to look around. After waking up, I looked over to the passenger seat, but the girl from earlier was gone. I was sure I had met a ghost. I got out of the car to check my surroundings, to see how far I had run. This road was too dark. I couldn't see anything around clearly. I could only follow the light from the car to go, but I hadn't taken 10 steps before I had to stop. Cold sweat poured out like water because of what I saw before my eyes. A little more than 3 meters from my car was a deep precipice, dark below with no bottom visible. If the car did not stop in time, it could have plunged straight into the bottom of the cliff. That thought made my limbs so weak that I couldn't even stand. I fell to the ground and my body kept shaking from fear. I sat there for a long time to regain my sanity. Then I got into the car again and kept going. I thought the other woman scared me because she wanted to save the girl in distress. Just like that, I continued to run. The road gradually became familiar. I knew what I was about to see. As I expected, the girl was injured in the accident once again appeared on the side of the road in front of my eyes, the same as before. She was still lying like that. This time, I decided to stop the car and check her out. I would have guessed that the woman in the car and the girl in the accident were the same people. She was dead, so she appeared to make me help her body. At this point, I didn't think much of it. I turned the girl over and called her to see if there was any reaction or not. But surprisingly, when I saw her face, it wasn't the woman in my car. They were 2 different people. After checking, she was still breathing but very weak, so I rushed her to the hospital. The road went very smoothly, no more strange happenings. Feeling guilty the next day, I bought some fruit to visit her. The girl said she had a traffic accident and was robbed. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have survived. But I was very guilty because I had no intention of helping her in the first place. As for that strange woman, I didn't know why she did that. The story took place on July 21, 2010 in Taiwan in a commercial and residential building known as Zushi Tiansha. The 5th floor of this building was a nursing house for mildly mentally ill patients, while the remaining floors were apartments and offices. 7 days ago, an elderly woman named Lee, who was being treated in the hospital on the 5th floor, went missing, and her family searched for days but couldn't find her. That afternoon, an elderly man was returning to his apartment on the 7th floor of the Zushi Tiansha building. Because he had only one daughter and was married, the elderly man lived alone on the 7th floor. When the elevator doors opened, the old man entered to go upstairs as usual, but he discovered that it was occupied by an elderly woman, but she didn't exit. The old man didn't think much of it, despite the fact that it was strange. She became even more bizarre after entering because she did not press to select any floor. It could have been a confused woman or a mental patient on the 5th floor. The old man mused to himself as he pressed the button to the 7th floor where he wanted to go. The elderly man casually inquired of the woman, "What floor do you want to go to?" The woman replied in hushed tones that she wanted to go to the 6th floor. The old man easily assisted her in pressing the 6th floor. He assumed she was confused and had forgotten to press. As the elevator rose, the old woman said nothing and did not respond either, despite the fact that the old man asked a few questions. "The 6th floor has been vacant for many years and has been sold for many years. Are you the one who bought it?" Because the old man suspected she was a psycho, He paid no attention to her anymore. After a while, the elevator took the two of them to the 6th floor as the old woman had requested. However, the woman did not approach the elevator door, indicating that she did not intend to exit the elevator. The man returned to remind her not to miss the elevator again.
Aren't you going to the 6th floor? There, you have it.
But this time the old man was taken aback. Something was wrong here. Behind him turned out to be empty and the woman vanished without a trace. There was only the old man in the elevator. Did she just vanish like this? This time terrified the old man. He had no idea what he was in for. Could it be that what he saw just now was a ghost? Just as the old man was becoming perplexed, the elevator door behind him slowly opened, indicating that something was abnormal. The old man looked back instinctively. He was also on the lookout for any unexpected situations that might arise. And the old man saw a dark figure rushing towards him. He had no idea what was going on. But as soon as he saw the figure clearly, he was terrified. He couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. It was an old woman with a hideous face, her skin rotting and revealing a grey color, and her body emitting a strong stench. The old lady with white eyes gaped at him with a cynical look. Her body was poured directly onto him, which terrified him. The old man collapsed to the ground in terror, and the woman also overpowered him. He was completely taken aback by what was happening. Wasn't this the old lady who just asked him to select the elevator button on the 6th floor? At the time, his reaction was perplexing. The old man had almost exhausted his remaining strength. From the other corner, the old woman's body was lying there, and he was leaning against the elevator's corner. He was terrified. But seeing the old woman's body lying on the ground, his legs were terrified and he couldn't stand up. However, he discovered another more terrible truth at this time. Because the old woman's body blocked the elevator door, preventing the elevator from running. With trembling hands, he quickly took out his cell phone and dialed his daughter's number, pleading for assistance. However, the signal in the elevator was very poor. He didn't remember how many times he called, but it appeared that he was unable to obtain the signal. His daughter worked as an office worker for a foreign invested company at the time. She knew her father was in distress after receiving the call, so she immediately dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the police arrived at the Tianxia building where the old man was trapped and were attempting to help him. However, when the police and rescue teams arrived, they saw the situation at the scene and it was helpless because so many things were intertwined. The cops used the old man's daughter's cell phone to contact him and wanted to save him as soon as possible, and there was only one way to do so. That was drag the decomposing old woman into the elevator and restart the elevator. The old man shivered when he realized he'd have to pull that horrible corpse by himself, but there was no other option. He thought the ghost of the old woman was beside him, so he just had to move this horrible rotting corpse? He had no idea what to do. However, he was unable to move or leave. He didn't want to spend another second with this body because it was getting dark. When the night came, if he was still present to keep this corpse and remain this closed elevator, a ghost might appear at any time. With this in mind, the elderly man closed his eyes and dragged the body into the elevator. The elevator finally started running after dragging the body into the elevator room, but as soon as the door closed, this terrible old man and woman were trapped in the cramped elevator. Still haunted by the sticky sensation of the old woman's rotting corpse, he looked around and found it deafeningly quiet. The entire world seemed to have vanished, leaving only the old man to guard the terrifying corpse. The elevator went down for a few minutes, and the old man felt like he'd been there for a century. Finally, the elevator descended to the first floor where the old woman's body was being handled by the rescue team below, and the old man collapsed before stepping out of the elevator with the assistance of his daughter. An investigation revealed that the old woman's body was identical to Mr. Lee's, who went missing 7 days ago. The police obtained surveillance footage of the entire building and revealed information about the incident. On July 14, Miss Lee, an elderly woman receiving care at a nursing home on the 5th floor, ghostly pressed a button to enter the elevator on the 6th floor. Miss Lee stepped out of the elevator after it reached the 6th floor in case no one noticed. The 6th floor was formerly a dojo, abandoned for unknown reasons for many years, recently sold to a new owner, who didn't know why, never used the place, so it remained empty. However, because the owner was concerned about other people entering, he welded a small iron cage to the elevator position. Miss Lee discovered that the elevator door at the back was closed after exiting the elevator. Because of the gap in this cage, she couldn't squat or lie down. She could only stand like this, and no one noticed she was trapped there. Following the autopsy, she died of dehydration. Perhaps the old man's discovery of her body was proof that the spirit can guide the way. In mid-June last year, I started attending a university in the city, so I had to move into a dormitory. That day, in the city, the rainy season started, so the rain didn't stop all day. I had to carry my luggage alone in the cold rain. As I was walking past the flowers in the schoolyard, I accidentally stepped on a black umbrella. At that time, I wanted to find the owner of this umbrella, but I couldn't find anyone around. So I decided to bring this umbrella to the dormitory and wait for the rain to stop and try to find the owner of the umbrella later. But when I got to the dorm, I had to rush to change my wet clothes and prepare a place to sleep. Meanwhile, I hung this umbrella on the top and I completely forgot about its existence. After that, I started meeting my roommates and getting to know them, and then went to the class for the first lesson. After a long day, I studied until late at night. When I was tired, I went to bed. Before I slept, I tried to change my rain-soaked clothes quickly and went to the bathroom to wash. After I finished washing clothes and returned to my room, I accidentally discovered that in the hallway of my room there was a faint black shadow. I thought someone was drying clothes, so I went out to have a look, but when I got there, no one was there. I tried looking around, but honestly, I was alone in the hallway. That made me a bit confused. Then I looked up at the black umbrella and thought to myself that I would return it the next morning. After that, I dried my clothes, went back to my bed and slept until the next morning. Early in the morning, my friends woke me up and they found out that I had a high fever. Because my roommate was worried about my health, she said she would ask for permission to let me take a leave and notify the administrator. After that, I decided to lock myself in my room and thought that it must be because of the rain yesterday that I caught a cold like this. While my friends went to their first lessons in class, I was lying on the bed and sleeping. But after a while, I heard footsteps echoing in my room. I could feel someone walking into my room and then across my bed and out onto the balcony where I hung my clothes. Then this mysterious person came in and stood beside my bed. She stared at me. I was startled and quickly turned around to see who it was, but I panicked when I saw a young man with a wet body standing next to the bed. In his hand, that young man was holding a black umbrella that I picked up in the flower bush. But the scariest thing at the time was the bloody, disfigured face of the angry young man looking at me with fear. I screamed out in fear and sat up, shuffled behind the bed. I didn't know what to do. Seeing that, The young man put down his umbrella and put his hand on my side to push me into a dead end. After that, a young man used his hoarse voice to scold me for taking away his black umbrella. This horrible young man forced me to return the black umbrella that I stole, which made me cry in fear. While being pushed to the wall by the young man, I accidentally hit my head on the wall behind me. After a while, I heard someone calling my name. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman in front of me. I woke up and sat up and saw that the manager of our room, she was still looking at me with worry. She said my roommate told her I had a fever, so she came here to check it out and then asked me what I was dreaming about and why I screamed like that. I was confused and didn't know how to answer her. Then she and I looked down at the ground. At the time, I panicked to see the black umbrella that I hung on the balcony, which was suddenly now in my room. I remembered, so I panicked and told the manager that I had met a scary young man. The owner of this umbrella came here to reclaim it. She didn't say anything after listening, just silently picked up the umbrella and told me to follow her out. Her attitude at the time surprised me. It seemed like she already knew something. I followed her to the office and saw her leave the umbrella at the door and go to the table. She called me to the table and asked me to sit down and told me a story about this umbrella. The owner of the umbrella was a student of my school and lived in my dorm room. He was a person with a difficult background. His father was a gambling addict and left him to take care of his grandmother. Because of his family's difficult situation, this young man considered quitting his studies, but he was supported by his teachers and raised enough money to pay for his tuition. The studious young man felt very lucky with that, so he studied hard and achieved admirable results. After that, he passed the entrance exam to my university and became the first valedictorian with the highest score in school ever since. During that time, he studied and worked on many different jobs to pay for his school fees. With his gentle and hard-working nature, he was very popular with friends and teachers, so everyone helped him with some money. But instead of taking the money, he refused because he thought that his savings from overtime could help him pay and leave the scholarship money to another friend with more difficult circumstances. Things started happening when entering the second semester at this dormitory. At the time, his father somehow found the dormitory and came here to find him in a miserable state. This man begged him to give him some food because he loved his father so much. The young man couldn't send him away. After that, he went down to the canteen and bought his father some food and brought it up to his room to eat. But when he returned to his room, he found his father had disappeared without leaving a message. After that, the young man looked over his desk and saw that the tuition money he had worked so hard to save was gone. Knowing who the thief was, he and the school called the police. However, with the little information provided, it was difficult for the police to catch his father. His roommate at the time also said that they had some valuables taken away, but no one blamed them. Not only that, after the incident happened, his roommates continuously comforted and tried to help him through this difficult time. But unexpectedly, this became a shock to the young man. That made him taciturn, quiet, and did not want to meet anyone. Until one day the whole dormitory suddenly became chaotic after a loud noise resounded from the balcony. His teachers and friends were all shocked when they discovered that the young man had committed suicide in the rain. The corpse of the young man lay motionless in a pool of blood. No one would dare to come near him. At that time, the person who felt pity for the young man was the manager of the dormitory, who was also the manager now. Out of pity for the young man's plight, she used this black umbrella to cover him from the rain and keep the scene intact. She stood in the rain, covered him with an umbrella until his body was loaded into an ambulance and taken away. After the incident, because of the chaos, her umbrella got lost somewhere unknown and gradually drifted into her oblivion. She then asked me where I found this umbrella in surprise. At the time, I told her that I saw an umbrella in the flowers in the dormitory yard. The manager got upset and said that's where the young man committed suicide that year. The heavy atmosphere between her and I was suddenly destroyed by a cold wind blowing across the room. We both looked at the door in surprise and saw that someone was looking at us. The manager immediately realized that it was the student who was in the accident when he was coming to claim the umbrella with his wet body. I was so scared that my face turned pale and I didn't dare to say anything. And the manager was so scared that she shivered. But then she stood up again and walked towards the student. Her action surprised me. She suppressed her fear and walked over to hug the unfortunate student. At that time, all the resentment in the young man suddenly turned into a smoke that flew into the air. The young man then also disappeared, and she collapsed on the floor. When I arrived, I found her body drenched, surrounded by strange puddles of water. Then she cried and whispered that he was a good person. After that, it was over and I didn't see that student anymore. My manager at the time continued to manage my dormitory and she was very popular with the students here. The black umbrella was still there, hanging by her in the office as a souvenir for the deceased student. My father had been a truck driver for nearly 5 years. Almost every route he was familiar with and especially had a very wide relationship. After a long time driving a rental truck, my father talked to my mother about buying and driving a truck on his own to make more money. My mother did not object, but it was not easy to buy a truck because she was a bit worried about finances at the time. My father was thinking about buying a used truck to drive. After talking to my mother and me, my father started going to used truck stores to find out. At that time, garages or used truck shops operated as intermediaries. That was truck owners would take the truck there and someone would broker to help them. After searching for a while, my father saw a truck that looked very new. He liked it right away. But after asking the price, my father sighed. Its price was slightly different from his original calculation. The salesman saw that my father was just asking and had no intention of buying it because of the high price. So the salesman said that he could recommend a satisfactory truck to my father at an affordable price. Then, the salesman took my father to see a truck he was talking about. The truck the salesman showed my father was new and beautiful. It was painted in a glossy orange color, and most important thing was that its price was very low. The size of the truck also fitted very well in my truck parking lot. Its machinery was also good. My father seemed to be very pleased and satisfied with the truck. After getting inside the truck, he was even more surprised because it was new. This accessory had not been rusted. In general, everything was very good. Another strange thing was that this truck had not run much, proving that this was a very new truck, not a degraded truck. So my father was satisfied and immediately closed the truck with the salesman. He also said that my father was very lucky to have bought it early and wished my father a prosperous business with this truck. Now, this truck was my father's companion on long journeys. He felt very satisfied and regularly cleaned it very meticulously. But on the first day my father drove to work, something happened. I remember that day my mother was cleaning the house when the phone rang. The call was from my father. He said on the phone that he had an accident on his way to work and was in the hospital. When my mother heard the bad news, she couldn't keep her composure and even dropped her phone on the ground. Then she rushed to the hospital to see how my father was doing. My father was sitting on a chair. 2 people were shouting at my father. That was the family member of the person that my father hit the truck with. Fortunately, the person was not seriously injured. When my father got out of the hospital, my mom asked him what was going on. My father said that he did not understand anything. He recounted that he was driving a delivery truck and turning a corner. At that time, my father glanced in the rearview mirror to see the road before turning the truck in. Suddenly, he saw a person walking beside the truck, but there was an absolute safe distance between the truck and that person. When my father reached the bend, a few people ran to the middle of the road to block the truck. They shouted to signal my father to stop the truck. One man said my father's truck hit someone. My father did not know what happened, but to be safe, he quickly braked and stopped the truck. My father quickly jumped out of the truck and approached the man to ask what was wrong. My father said many times that he didn't think he hit that person, but he didn't understand why a man fell on the street like that. That man injured his hand, screaming to ask my father to pay compensation for causing the accident. When he told my mother about it, my father said that the man most likely was trying to rush into the truck to get angry. A week later, my father resumed work as usual. However, a strange incident happened, causing my father to find himself once again in a confusing situation. That day, when my mother was cleaning at home, the phone rang again. When my mother picked up the phone, she was startled to hear that my father had caused an accident again, and this time with a child. The parents of the child went to the traffic police office to resolve the incident in anger. When my mother arrived, she saw my father sitting outside and waiting for the results from the traffic police. When my mother went inside to see the victim's condition, the child's parents were angry. However, the child was unharmed. The child saw his parents scold him. Then he suddenly said something very strange that even my mother could not believe. The child said that he wasn't hit by my father. Someone pulled him under the truck. The boy said that he was walking on the sidewalk that day and he was going to stop by the store to buy something. Hearing the sound of a truck approaching, the child purposely moved to the side with distance enough to keep him safe. The truck was also running at a very slow speed and was very safe. But just as the truck passed him, he suddenly saw a person sticking out from under the truck with very sharp fingernails. The man looked bloodied. His eyes could only see the black irises, and he quickly pulled the child under the truck. When the child told that story, his parents told him not to tell such myths because why was there someone under the truck? While everyone was arguing, the traffic policeman in charge walked in. He said that they got surveillance footage of that stretch of road and asked us to come to see it. It was good that the whole process of the accident was captured so realistically. When my father's truck passed a child, there was indeed a safe certain distance between the two. That distance was too far for my father to cause an accident. Suddenly, the child seemed to be dragged under the truck like on camera, but at this point we didn't see anyone under the truck. The child was like being sucked under the truck. When it was clear, the child's parents took him out of the police office and did not make any further claims. My parents were on their way home when a policeman called back. He asked my father if the truck had to be purchased below market value. Through investigation, that truck was involved in a fatal accident just last month. A young man was hit by a truck, sucked under the truck, and dragged more than 10 meters. After my parents got home, they discussed it many times and decided to sell the unlucky truck. It had been a few years since this happened, and my father still drove someone else's rental truck and never mentioned the idea of buying his own truck anymore. My elementary school teacher was a person who didn't believe in ghosts, but that year, something terrible happened that made him start to change his mind. The school I attended at the time was small in the village. In the past, the school was even more rickety and shabby, but then with donations from everyone, it was also more spacious. My teacher's name was Zhang. He was always busy and dedicated to his work. That day, he stayed at the office very late to prepare the outline for the following day. As soon as it was all over, he was able to relax his body and stretch his shoulders. Then suddenly heard a noise coming from the window. It was like someone was walking back and forth in the schoolyard and throwing sand into the room. He listened to hear better, then noticed that the noise was getting louder and louder. The more he heard it, the more it sounded like someone was moving the sand outside. Thinking that there were still some boarding students playing outside at this hour, he slowly approached the door to have a look. Strangely, when he opened the door, there was no one outside. Everything was still extremely quiet. Muttering a few words, he went back inside. He thought partly because he heard it wrong or just normal wind. So he quickly sat down at the table to prepare to continue working. But as soon as he sat down on the chair, the same noise started again. This time the sound was louder than before. At this point, he thought that someone was trying to make fun of him, so he went quickly and opened the door with a few scolding sentences. But it was still like at first. Everything was extremely silent outside, not even wind. Even that day the weather was hotter than usual. This thing made him start to wonder and be confused. He closed the door to go inside, but thought about the sound in his mind. But being a person who did not believe in ghosts, he still did not think much. Then he continued to sit at the table and drafted the outline for the rest. The noise was again heard outside the courtyard, this time more clearly and longer than the previous two, but he chose not to care about it anymore. Whatever it was, just didn't care. So he sat at the table and finished all his work without going out to the yard to check it out. After the work was done, it was already past midnight. There would always be boarding rooms for teachers to stay at the school. Since it was late at night and he still had to get up early tomorrow, he decided to stay in the teacher's boarding room. He also forgot that the strange noise from outside was no longer heard. He thought that someone must have known he was late and wanted to scare him, but they stopped when they got bored. At this moment, cold air rushed in from the door, surprising him, so he quickly looked out. The window was still closed, but there was a figure outside the door. Because it was too dark, the face could not be seen clearly. It seemed to be a man. That man was standing close to the window and staring at Mr. Zhang. Too surprised because suddenly at this time a stranger was standing outside the door looking at him, Mr. Zhang immediately ran to the door, thinking that the man had been teasing him by pretending to be a ghost, so Mr. Zhang was very angry. However, when he opened the door and looked at the window, the man had disappeared from time to time. Seeing that, Zhang was also confused as to what was going on. He shouted to ask if anyone was here teasing him, but everything remained silent. At this moment he was also a little worried and felt strange. Maybe it was a ghost. Otherwise, how could it disappear so quickly? Besides, the school had never had strangers enter. But feeling that nothing happened, he quickly changed his clothes and went to bed because the following day was an important class. As soon as he lay down on the bed, Mr. Zhang began to hear the sound of sand pulling, footsteps and noise in the yard. It was louder and more chaotic than he first heard. Curious, he began to put his glasses on and listen carefully again, just afraid that he heard the wrong steps. And when he came up, there was no one like before. But the footsteps became louder and clearer. Certainly not by mistake. Mr. Zhang slowly got out of bed and put on his slippers. This time, he would be gentle, so that if someone teases, they would not be able to run in time. But when he looked out at the yard through the glass window, the things outside made him terrified. Many people were walking outside, or rather the whole yard was full of people. Suddenly, in the middle of the yard, he didn't know the graves. How could it be grown so quickly? Countless graves appeared all over the schoolyard. Fearing that he might have misjudged his vision due to fatigue or because he was in a dream, he carefully took off his glasses and wiped them carefully to see again. This time, it was unmistakable. No one made fun of him at all. He must have met a ghost. The schoolyard was now littered with graves and monstrous people. Their gazes were contorted and their white eyes had no irises. Some people even looked like they had sores, which were very scary. Suddenly, one of them discovered Mr. Zhang peeking from inside the room. That freaked him out. Mr. Zhang tried to cover his mouth and nose with both hands. He was afraid that even breathing lightly would be discovered by all those ghostly people. But it was too late. As soon as he covered his mouth, they also discovered him. So they turned all their attention to him. These people were so monstrous, even their heads were bent backwards as if broken. Their heads were hanging and looked terrible. After that, they gathered together and approached Mr. Zhang's room. More and more people flocked to the door of the room. They stood outside the glass door and looked inside. Only now could their faces be seen clearly. Some people had their entire faces destroyed. People had broken limbs. People had broken necks. People had blood all over their faces. The scene couldn't be more terrifying. Mr. Zhang was so scared that he fell backward. His legs were frozen, unable to move. They jostled and jostled each other, then pressed their faces to the glass as if they were watching something interesting, thinking they could rush into the room at any moment. Terrified, Mr. Zhang could only try and let out a scream when he passed out. What happened after that? Mr. Zhang didn't know anything anymore. The following morning, the other teachers came and found that Mr. Zhang had fainted on the ground, so they took him to the infirmary. He was finally able to wake up and still be at peace. After he calmed down, he also recounted everything that happened last night. After hearing the story, everyone suddenly remembered that this school was built on the land of a mass grave. There used to be a lot of strange things happening here. After that incident, the school invited a Feng Shui master to review the school, and the Feng Shui master proposed to build a large stone board in the middle of the schoolyard as a cover. And it worked. After building that stele, everything continued to go on as usual. No one was scared anymore.
Hello there. I'm currently a college student who also used to work as a part-time shipper. Actually, it was my side job working as a shipper. It was pretty tiring and I was weary sometimes, but I earned a pretty good amount of money from it. Whether it was a sunny day or a rainy one, there were always lots of food orders from the customers. Occasionally, I had to learn how to deal with my difficult customers, or how to greet them appropriately so they could be satisfied and give me a 5-star review. I was pleased with the shipping job and I had no intention of looking for another one until one day. Normally the working time for a shipper isn't fixed. There were days when I finished my work at 11 PM, but there were also days that I had to work until 2 AM or even 3 AM. At night, when there were fewer food orders, the shippers would gather at one particular place, smoking, chatting while waiting for the orders. Normally the topic of the talks would revolve around the freaky customers they encountered, or how some restaurant staff had bad attitude towards them. One wouldn't be able to do this job if they didn't have enough stamina and patience. Also, I was chit-chatting with my co-workers when my phone suddenly vibrated.
It was a food order from a customer, but the address in it looked kinda strange to me. I asked my 2 co-workers where the place was, but they had no idea. The location was unclear, and it was already at midnight, but since I accidentally accepted the order, I had to say goodbye to my friends and hit the road. But at least I still had Google Maps with me. I didn't feel worried at all, as I thought I would easily find the place and quickly return home. Then I drove to the restaurant, bought the food and delivered it to the customer. However, as I was on my way to the address which was displayed on the phone screen, I felt like the distance was way longer than I had expected. The further I drove, the more unlikely I found it that I could find the place. In a moment I realized that I had been outside the city. Feeling annoyed, I wanted to go back, but thinking of the long distance I had driven and the food I had bought, I patiently tried to reach the destination. Behind a row of dense trees appeared a riverbank road and then a forest. But the thing that was worth noticing was I didn't encounter any single person on my way to the place. Right the moment I wanted to quit, a notification popped up saying I was only 100 meters away from the destination. So I kept driving. I stopped by a large gate. It looked like there was a mansion behind the gate. But there was something really strange with this house. From the front door to the garden, there were no lights in sight. The gate wasn't locked, and there was also no doorbell. I made a phone call, but no one answered it. So I plucked up all my courage and went inside with a food bag in my hand. I had to turn on a flashlight to navigate my way to the house. How enormous this mansion was. The garden was extremely large that took me forever to find the way to the main door. There were even gusts of cold winds that sent chills down my spine, giving me shivers as sweat was dripping down my forehead. Not only that, in the dim light of the flash, I discovered something truly frightening. At the end of the garden appeared a cemetery as it slowly emerged from the darkness. The eerie sound of leaves flying in the air made my skin crawl. I started trembling when I saw the graves. The food bag dropped out of my hand and fell onto the ground. I was dumbfounded for a few seconds and quickly ran out of the place as fast as I could. I got on my bike and drove away in horror. The next day I got sick and was bedridden for 2 days. It was truly the worst time of my life. As I woke up, there were 2 options that I had to pick one out. One was to continue my shipping job and the other one was to quit and find myself a new job. So after 3 days I decided to get back to work, even though I was still not recovered from the incident that had happened to me that night. I told my 2 co-workers about the bizarre incident. One of them assumed there was a likelihood that one making the order was living at the cemetery, while the other said I had gotten myself involved in some ghostly stuff. They advised me to buy some offerings and burn them to get rid of the bad luck. Although I didn't hold out much hope that this would work, I still did it anyway as it was for my safety. But things didn't get any better. A few days later, another spooky incident happened to me again. That night, I received a food order and the address was at an apartment building where I had once been to. I easily found the building. It was located in the city and took me 7 minutes to reach the destination. However, the building looked pretty old and there were only a few residents who's been living there. The place to which the food had to be delivered was an apartment located on the 7th floor. The building didn't even have elevators as I had to climb up the stairs, but it was still better than navigating the path on the garden of the cemetery that night. I finally found the apartment. As things were going okay, I somehow had a bad premonition. I knocked on the door with my heart beating uncontrollably. Fortunately, a woman opened the door. As soon as she saw me, she confusedly asked who I was and why I came to her place. Fearing that I had come to the wrong address, I took out my phone and checked if it was any mistake, but found none. I had indeed come to the right place. But the woman insisted on not ordering any food. Even her husband constantly affirmed that I had come to the wrong address. I was angry but chose not to say anything, as it would violate the company's principles if I irritated the customers. I suddenly remembered there was always a phone number in an order, so I pressed call. The phone in their house rang out as soon as I called. But soon there was a bewildered expression on them, as they said they didn't know where the sound was originating from, and even had no idea who had placed the order, since there was only 2 of them in the house. A few seconds later, as if the 2 had remembered something, their faces changed color, and for me, there was like a burning fire in my heart, as I was under the impression the 2 were playing a joke on me. According to the man, the ringtone was similar to that of his father's phone. Moreover, it even came out of his room. I was delighted to hear that. I quickly handed the food back to him, as we finally knew who was the one who made the order. "Could you 2 please take the food to your father and make a payment for me?" But the scared and panicked look on them gave me an impression that things were not as simple as they might seem. As I just finished my sentence, the 2 turned around and spoke simultaneously. Their father had passed away. I couldn't stay calm, as I thought they were teasing me. With a furious expression on my face, I howled at them and demanded them to take the food back. Seeing me behaving aggressively, the man was agitated. The woman had to rush in and stop us from getting into a fight. Eventually she agreed to pay for the food. After making the payment, the 2 slammed the door in anger. It was unknown why, but I didn't want to leave immediately, as I just stood in front of the door for a while in bewilderment. Then I accidentally heard part of a conversation from the 2 freaky customers. Their father had passed away a month ago. His phone had run out of battery and was carefully placed into a drawer in his room, so it would be impossible for someone to use his phone and place an order. After listening to their conversation, I quickly ran away in horror. Right the moment I got out of the building, my phone vibrated. Can you believe it? It was the number I previously called that gave me a 5-star review. Later, I gradually got used to dealing with these bizarre incidents and also the freaky customers. But for my safety, I had avoided delivering food at night. This story is about a real estate agent named Higo. Today he had an important meeting with a wealthy landlord. The landlord rushed to greet him as soon as he entered the house and thoughtfully poured tea to invite him. Higo approached him shyly and inquired briefly about the mansion. 2 people talked about the contract and the commission agreement, as well as the selling price. Despite the fact that the decision had been made, the owner seemed to be depressed. Higo didn't pay much attention to that. The only thing he was concerned with was the profit that he would earn. He presented the owner with a completed contract and waited for a response. Meanwhile, the mood in the living room had deteriorated. Higo felt a shivering sensation all of a sudden. The door to the living room burst open when he turned back slightly to have a look. He inquired innocently of the landlord about the state of the facilities, infrastructure, and quality of this villa in order to conduct an evaluation, but the owner was unconcerned, simply stating that he was willing to sell at whatever price Higo deemed reasonable. Higo was taken aback by this. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound outside of the corridor. Before Higo could ask what was going on, the landlord handed him the contract and explained what needed to be revised before asking when he could resume signing. Higo received the contract, carefully memorized the customer's request, and then quickly left. The owner also sent him to the door. On the way to the door, he noticed cold air coming from this house, as if something strange was going on. Apparently, he had a feeling that this landlord was concealing something from him. He moved his gaze to a small corner of the living room. Some old toys for children had been left in the corner. Higo found it difficult to comprehend, but then he set aside the story about this house and strolled out leisurely. A cold breeze blew lightly on his back as he approached the gate. Higo had the impression that someone was staring at him. He then turned his head to look again at that house. When he turned around, there was a tiny shadow standing at the upper window. The face appeared of a little boy with dark eyes and pale skin. Higo looked at him with surprise, sensing that something was wrong. The landlord told him that he didn't have a wife or child. How come there was a boy standing there? But he soon discovered that his concern was futile. So Higo walked straight to the gate to continue his work, where the boy silently watched him. It was strange that he had just left the villa not long ago. The landlord called him back with a very urgent attitude, demanding that he wanted to conclude the contract as soon as possible. Higo returned to the villa for his client. He stood in front of the house and gently rang the bell, but it took a long time for the old landlord to respond. He had been waiting outside for a long time. He banged on the door and shouted loudly because his instincts told him that something bad had happened, but it didn't work. He discovered that the door was not locked while knocking. He pushed in curiously, wondering where this old man could go. Why the landlord didn't lock the door if he went out. Back into the room, he heard painful groans of the landlord calling his name. The landlord appeared covered in blood in front of him. Something slashed across his back, and he was running to Higo in fear, looking for help. He landed on Higo's body. Higo picked up the old man reflexively, asking him what had just happened. The old man hummed. Extreme panic said that someone wanted to kill him. Higo had a chance to look behind the landlord when he fell on him, but it was a lot stranger than he thought. Behind him was an empty room with no one, no footprints, and no indication that anyone other than the owner was present. He panicked and rushed the old man to the hospital. Fortunately, the injury was minor, and he regained consciousness within a few minutes. His entire body was wrapped in white bandages, and tired eyes stared at him. When Higo asked him about the incident, his eyes revealed a little sadness and remorse. The old landlord called Higo to stand closer to him, and then sorrowfully told him the whole story, beginning with a bad decision he made a year ago. He was a failed businessman at that time. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. All of the projects he invested in had failed completely, that he ended up empty-handed. During a drink with a friend, he was tipped away to save the business, a very useful trick he picked up while traveling in Thailand. That was to invite Kumantong to worship in his home. The infant demon was a dread fetal body that was placed in a statue, then cast a spell to calm the soul so that it could stay in this world to save and bless the adoptee who was considered to be his biological parents. Because he was poor and stuck at the time, he listened to his friend and traveled to Thailand to request a statue of an infant demon to worship at home. At the beginning, everything came true. The devil provided him with whatever he desired. Money kept pouring into his pocket. His previous partners had rejected him before, now also back to collaboration. Sometime later, he met a beautiful young woman. The two quickly married. Not long after that, the wife became pregnant. The doctor on the ultrasound said it was a healthy boy. During the pregnancy, the wife always had a feeling of something very insecure, especially when she passed the altar of the devil that he placed in the house. One time the wife was passing by the altar of the Kumantong. She slightly looked up at the altar. In a sudden, she saw the demon's face changed, staring at her. She told her husband about this, but he not only didn't care, he also considered it as a joke. Because she couldn't sleep, the wife went down to the stairs alone as if someone made her do it. Just a few steps, a great force behind her slammed into her back. Panicked, she turned her head to see what was standing behind her. She saw the infant demon standing on the stairs, looking at her, killing sight in his eyes. She fell down the stairs, slamming her body into the ground. She was unconscious and bleeding profusely. After that, she not only couldn't keep the pregnancy, but she also lost her ability to become pregnant again. The couple started to fight from there. He couldn't hold on to that broken marriage any longer, so he watched her leave the house with a suitcase. Since then, his career had also taken a downward turn. Losing his wife and family was devastating enough that he was unable to maintain his career. To cope with his grief, he turned to alcohol, until one day when he returned home drunk, he looked at the Kumantong statue on the altar and became enraged. He blamed Kumantong for his life being ruined and stuck, so he raised his hand intending to smash the bottle of wine on the demon's head in order to destroy the statue. But a ray of turquoise light shot at him before he could do anything. He slammed the bottle of wine onto his head instead. Blood splattered and his head hurt like hell. He regained his composure, looking around giddily, not understanding anything. When he looked up at the altar, he noticed that the Kumantong had transformed and now was staring at him with a soft-boasting smile. Until today, he decided to stay at home and called Higo in order to discuss about the selling of this house. While he was speaking, a sharp knife from the table rushed towards him. He was fortunate to avoid the knife's tip, but the knife cut him deeply on one of his cheeks. He unconsciously looked up at the roof and noticed the Kumantong floating in the air. That demon was staring at him. His eyes were white and wide open, and he had a hostile expression on his face. The demon then cast a spell that caused his furniture to fly up and then threw him like a storm, rendering him unable to dodge. Higo felt panicked after hearing the story and worried about the contract with his landlord. He said his goodbyes to the landlord and then left quietly. He kept thinking about the horror story he had just heard as he drove. He walked past a mansion that was once thought to be a big catch for him. He couldn't help but be concerned when he saw the billboard in front of the house. Higo paused for a moment before taking a step closer. The infant demon was still looking at him from above, right at the window, but his smile had become more ghostly than ever. This horrifying event occurred when I was young and studying in an old vocational school. I came from the countryside at that time, so I had to stay in the school's dormitory. I also had two other female friends, Lily and Anna, who came from another rural area to study and stayed in the same dormitory as me. Lily was very attractive and pursued by many people, whereas Anna was shy and had never mentioned love before. On the contrary, she was solely focused on her studies. Our dormitory was very cold and dark at night because it was built more than 10 years ago. That was why Anna never wanted to do the bathroom alone. That night, I was falling asleep when I heard someone calling out to me and shaking me to wake me up. I slowly opened my eyes to see what was wrong. Anna was standing next to the bed, her face a little shy, but she wanted me to go to the bathroom with her. Because I was used to it, it didn't bother me, so I agreed right away. The two of us went to the bathroom together and didn't forget to tease her about how shy she was on the way. But in a trembling voice, she stated that this school had been haunted for a long time and that the ghost story was well known to everyone. I didn't believe in ghosts, so when I heard those words, I didn't pay much attention, even laughing at her that she had heard fake news and was scared for no reason. Then I walked away, returned to the bedroom as soon as possible. And Anna, after hearing what I said, seemed angry because I didn't believe what she said. So Anna chased after me. Her face became more serious, her voice no longer trembling, and she tried to tell me the story of the ghost in red who haunted this school. It was a female demon who committed suicide out of love, and thus couldn't flee. I was still not interested in this story, and when we arrived to the bathroom, I just told her to go quickly and return as soon as possible. But Anna was a coward. She didn't want me to wait outside. Instead, she told me to go inside and wait. Seeing Anna's fear, I had no choice but to go inside as she instructed and stood close to the wall to look over. This toilet was in desperate need of repair because it was too old. Suddenly, a gust of cold air blew from nowhere, causing my entire body to shiver uncontrollably. Obviously, this was a closed room, so how could there be such a breeze? So, I urged Anna to hurry up and return as soon as possible. When I turned to have a look at the toilet that Anna was using, I noticed something strange. It was the room next to Anna's that was also being used by another person. I wasn't sure when she was there, but Anna and I walked in and didn't notice her. What was odd was that she was wearing red high heels instead of slippers like the rest of us. It was after midnight, the dorms were closed. No one should dress up to go out at this time, and wearing high heels to the bathroom was unusual. Although I wasn't afraid of ghosts, seeing that scene made me nervous, so I knocked on Anna's door and continued to urge her. Anna's face was slightly irritated when she walked out as a result of my constant prodding. I didn't say much, just told her that I needed to get back to my room. Anna teased me at the time because she thought standing outside alone made me scared, while I dared to say I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I didn't dare to mention the strange woman next to Anna's room because I knew she was very cowardly, so I sneaked a glance to confirm once more if it was really human after all. But unexpectedly, the woman in red shoes vanished and the bathroom was deserted. I couldn't only reassure myself that I was mistaken because I had heard Anna's story and imagined it myself. After that, we returned to the bedroom and I decided not to tell Anna what I had seen. I quickly fell asleep, but no longer after my entire body went numb and it became difficult to breathe as if someone was pressing against me. The air became very cold. I heard the door being opened very loudly. A woman dressed in bright red dress with long black hair stood there. I panicked and took a close look at the woman. Her face was extremely frightening. Her wide mouth was full of blood, her eyes without pupils, only white, and her neck appeared to have been squeezed by something, leaving a fairly obvious mark. Her dress was ripped, but the scariest part was that she was wearing a pair of red high heels, the same ones I saw in the bathroom just before. She was also floating with her feet barely touching the ground. Apparently, she was the female demon Anna mentioned. She just hovered like that and came to Anna's bed. Anna suddenly sat up, not hearing any voice or movement from her. I could only see Anna sat up as if she was ordered to do so by the demon. Anna's eyes were lifeless, like a sleepwalker, and her skin had turned pale. Anna jumped out of bed and began walking slowly across my bed, right behind the female demon. Anna lowered her face, but her body continued to walk unconsciously. I was terrified, but I didn't want Anna to follow the demon, so I screamed and tried to stop her, but my mouth was glued shut. I couldn't open it, and my body was heavy and numb. So, I had no choice but to watch Anna follow the demon out of the room. I was dreaming when I was startled awake by a scream. When I awoke, I opened my eyes and saw that the room was lit, indicating that it was all a dream. Looking at the door, I noticed Lily and other girls from the other room gathered outside. It appeared that something had happened to Anna, because the roommate next door appeared very concerned. She said with a serious face and trembling voice something happened to Anna, and she asked everyone to come to have a look. Anna was in the bathroom. I looked over at Anna's bed, and she was no longer there. I began to be concerned about my dream last night. We were all panicked and at the time rushed there to see Anna's situation. In my heart, I just hoped she didn't meet anything serious. Lily was the first to arrive, and I still didn't know what happened to Anna. When I heard Lily scream in fear, I was startled as well. I also rushed inside to watch as most heinous thing I could not bear happening right in front of my eyes. Anna was dead. She was sitting on the floor, her skin pale. Could it be that my dream from the previous night came true, and it was the female demon who killed her? Anna's eyes wide open but white, and her face no longer had bloodstains, and she died because she cut her own wrist. The blood was all over the floor and she must have been in great pain. Later, Anna's family members joined the procession to return Anna's body to her hometown. They also had a heated debate with the school, while the school claiming that Anna committed suicide out of love. But I knew Anna had never had a lover and would never do something so stupid. I couldn't get a good sleep after that night. When I recalled the scene on the day Anna died, I always got agitated. In a dream, I saw Anna standing next to the bed, jolting me awake. Seeing Anna again made me very happy, and despite the fact that she was dead, I felt no fear. However, Anna appeared to be in a hurry. She simply stated that I needed to go and immediately drew my hand out of bed. I looked down and saw that the cut on Anna's wrist was still open and that the blood was flowing. I began to panic because I remembered the demon in red, afraid that she would have transformed into Anna and seduced me the same way she had taken Anna away that night, so I struggled to fight back. Anna's face erupted in rage. She held and dashed towards me. She rushed to me, yelling that there was no time and that I must leave immediately. I awoke from my dream at the same time I heard Lily scream. We exchanged glances and discussed the previous dream. Strangely, Lily had the same dream as me. We believed that Anna wanted us to leave the building for a reason, so without a doubt we dashed to the door and fled as quickly as we could. As soon as we arrived on the ground floor, a plume of black smoke rose out from the floor. Lily and I were both terrified and had no idea what was going on. The fire broke out after a few minutes and spread to the other floors of the building. Fortunately, we could escape in time. Lily and I stood dumbfounded, looking up at our windows, where a figure stood, staring at us. It was Anna, looking at us through the windows with a happy smile on her face. It turned out that Anna was the one who saved us from the fire. Perhaps it was because this was the last thing she wanted to do for us that her smile was so satisfying.